Guidance. That's what I need. Guidance. I mean, if I knew where I was supposed to go and what the plan actually was, I could get on with it and make it happen. Just tell me what I need to do, where I need to be, and when, and I'll be there. Wouldn't it be lovely if we always just knew what we were supposed to be doing? My name is Ian Currey, and this is Thinking Out Loud. Come on, let me tell you what I think. Well, here we are at the start of another year. By now, most of us have already made, broken and forgotten New Year's resolutions and are back to the grind of doing what we do. My brain has had a few weeks off from making videos, but never quite shuts down completely. You may remember at the end of last year, I seemed to be flying to London every week. That's because I was. Now, having grown up there and now visiting regularly, I've had a chance to try to make some of my memories fit with today's reality. I remember a dirty, smoky, noisy place with long lines of cars everywhere. Now, we didn't have a car, so either walked or rode public transport. Now, that wasn't a problem though, especially because I loved anything to do with buses, trains, and especially the underground. Despite what people may tell you, traffic was much worse back then than it is today. This is Regent Street. Do you notice anything? Right before Christmas, at a very busy time, and yet the traffic is moving. When I was a boy, there were more lanes of traffic than there are today in that street, and it crawled along at a snail's pace. The question then wasn't so much of direction, but time. We knew where we were going and generally just needed to know how long it would take. Now, even today, if you ask directions in London, you won't get distances, but time. BBC, go up Regent Street for 10 minutes, turn right at All Souls and you can't miss it. Guidance is something we all look for at one time or another, but how receptive to it are we? How much guidance do we really actually need? Being into all things transport, I suppose, I can't help noticing how David the psalmist writes of how difficult it can be to guide a horse or mule. We've all heard the expression, stubborn as a mule. Do not be like a senseless horse or mule that needs a bit or bridle to keep it under control. Now, I've never had a particular interest in horse or donkey carts, but guiding them seems to me to be close to the kind of guidance some of us need. This year, Father Christmas bought me a wooden tram. It took an afternoon to build from the kit and kept me away from the Quality Street chocolates for a while. Trams and trains really are easy to guide, mostly. They don't go backwards very well and have rails that take them where they need to go. The driver basically has little to do other than to decide when to go and how fast. Easy then. A train asking for guidance is hardly likely to be a thing. Buses are a little different. While train drivers do need to learn the route they are driving, buses can actually take wrong turns and end up where they shouldn't be. Now, most of you will know that Hilary and I lived on a ship for several years, and ships have an even more difficult job getting where they're going. With a ship, there usually aren't roads and lanes marked out to follow, but instead, navigation becomes all important. The person in charge of the ship needs to pay attention to all sorts of factors that buses and trains are unaffected by. These days, since I work for an airline, most of the travelling I do is by plane. I used to think getting a ship to go where you wanted to go was hard enough, but with a plane, all of a sudden, there's a whole nother dimension that's added, up and down. Moving about in free space can be rather terrifying if you don't know where you're heading. Despite all of the complexity of flight, I'm always amazed at how we know before we go almost exactly when we'll land, how bumpy the journey will be, and which speed we'll need to fly to compensate for weather along the way. So, the most complicated of all the modes of transport I use regularly, an aircraft, seems to have very little trouble getting where it's going. So how do we do that? How do pilots know where to turn, which altitude to fly, and how fast we need to go? Of course, there's a plan. With aircraft, it's called a flight plan. And I suppose with a train, it might be called a timetable. Aircraft rely on all sorts of clever radio communication too. Aside from the whole navigation of the plane, what we do along the way is also controlled by people guiding us. If there is a medical event, and there often is it seems, then the crew have tools that put them in contact with doctors on the ground that can guide them through the best course of action and ultimately decide if we need to divert to a different airport. Right before talking about not being as stubborn as a mule, David reminds us that God says he will be there with us. The Lord says, I will guide you along the best pathway for your life. I will advise you and watch over you. Guidance, then, might be more to do with being in contact with the one offering guidance. Perhaps too realizing that we do, in fact, have a lot of freedom to choose what we do and where we go. Now, God offers to suggest the best path for us, but it's up to us to listen to his prompting. Guidance is perhaps one of the things we most need in our lives, and certainly over my life has been one of the things I'm often the least sure I'm getting right. Perhaps a little more listening to God and realizing he indeed wants the best path for us would be a great place to start. Dare I say, rather than deciding where we want to go and then asking God to guide us, perhaps letting God decide and listening to his advice might allow us to enjoy the ride a little more. Until next time, goodbye.